So it's been a little over a year since I have added all of these upgrades to my Samick Sage bow, which I regularly use for target shooting. And I wanted to take this time to review those upgrades that I've done since that initial video a year ago and talk about the stuff individually and in detail. So let's get started. I'm hoping that I'm able to pull up the individual information on the order that I did at Lancaster when I purchased these things, so that you can see the cost and information and order numbers for these, so that if you decide you want to get them too, you can. And the three things that I had purchased was this button right here, which I've added to the bow, the rest, and the sight, the SF Velocity Carbon Pro. Most people don't really think about this, but when I purchase stuff, I always have to keep in mind that the thing that I purchase must be either left-handed or can be converted to left-handed, or it has to be ambidextrous, because all of my stuff is set up for lefty, and if it's not going to work for lefty, I can't buy it. This particular rest only requires, when you purchase it, that this screw is loosened, it's flipped over to the other side, and then tightened back down, and then it's put on for a left-handed setup. That's all that's needed. It also has an adjustment within that screw that sets how far it comes out and how far it comes down. You know, all in one complete package right there. I can't tell you how many arrows I've sent down range using this rest. I've had zero problems with it. I have nothing bad to say about it. It has not come loose from this bow since it was placed on there. I've not had any problems with this screw. I do believe I may have used some blue Loctite. I always keep blue Loctite with me and use it for assemblies, but I've never had any issues. And as far as a recommendation from people, these particular rests that also, it has a magnet. It snaps back with the magnet. You can feel it. I would recommend it to anybody. So that's where I stand with the rest. There's really not a whole lot to say with regard to a rest, other than I'm glad that I made this purchase, and down the road, should this rest ever break and require replacement, I would get the very same rest again. I was actually surprised that this particular bow, the Samick Sage, had a provision for a button. It's not the kind of bow that you would really consider would have that kind of provision that an Olympic target bow would, and yet it does, right? We can see that. And I had purchased this button in the hopes of, obviously, you know, accomplishing the same thing that anybody else who would purchase a button would, and that's obviously to provide some resistance in this direction against the shaft of the arrow. And this button came with different springs, different spring tensions, and different settings. There are quite a bit of settings associated with this. So setting it up is not an easy or a quick process, and requires a lot of trial and error. It had different ends that were used, and I'll tell you that once I got it where I needed to, and it wasn't all on my part, it required assistance in finding out how to do this properly. But once it got set up where it should be, it's pretty much left alone. It clearly doesn't wear down very quickly, and when it does, as I've seen on the website, there is the ability to get the pieces that wear down replaced, being the top portion, right? And when I looked at the old rest not having the button, and the old rest was one of the little cheap rubber ones where the rubber on the rest sort of acted to provide that resistance. It was really eating into it because it really wasn't doing the job. So with regard to the button, again, I have absolutely no regrets about the purchase that I made for this particular product. I would buy it again. But I will also point out that if you're thinking that you can just simply purchase a button and somehow this is going to improve your performance in archery, you're wrong, and it's going to take a lot of work to get this set up for an ideal situation. This is one where I kind of missed. I'm not talking about the sight just yet. What I'm talking about is this. I have a bolt-on clicker right here, and I haven't really even actually cut it to size. And you can see that it works with magnets again, and you could load the arrow under it, and as soon as you pull back far enough, it'll snap back and you release. The reason why I had purchased this particular clicker is that, as it would turn out, there is no provision on the Samick Sage for a clicker as you would find on an Olympic bow. And this one was, number one, it was cheap. And number two, it allowed me to try out a clicker cheaply without having to modify this bow. I'll say a couple things. Number one, I find that these days I don't use it. It kind of sits there on the site and sits there for show. And every now and again I'll try it out. And I think it's because I haven't really been training with it, number one. And number two, I don't really find it to be ideal as far as its performance. It exerts a lot of pressure on the shaft of the arrow in a way that I don't believe that when I look at how Olympic bows are set up, I don't think this clicker really matches the intent of what they should be doing. You know, this one really sort of lays down right on the side and snaps back like that. Again, I could be wrong. This is just an observation of the things that I've purchased and how I feel about those experiences. And somebody may correct me, and that's absolutely fine. The good thing about this is that it is, you know, designed to mount on the site, and it can be moved forward or back in such a way on the site that basically this is what sets up exactly the point in which you'd release the arrow, which, by the way, as far as adjustment goes, seems rather nice. But then if you need to adjust this for release, you have to do it with this screw here. It's not easily adjustable in the field. You know, if you need to adjust by millimeters, this is quite difficult to do. So this is one of those where, you know, I'm not really happy with the purchase, but I didn't spend a whole lot of money on it, so I'm willing to move past it. And finally, we get into the sight itself. Out of all the purchases I've made, this was the most expensive. However, I am extremely happy with this sight. I have nothing bad to say about this whatsoever. I have, obviously, like anybody who would go from a little peep sight to something like this, it's a bit overwhelming at first as you try and figure out how everything works. The mount was fully compatible with the Samick Sage. The ability to dictate how far it comes out of the bow, how far it extends out, is very helpful. It's sort of the way it's set up. It's cut in slightly here, so it's got a positive lock to it. When the screw tightens down, it's a nylon end to the locking screw, which is very nice. And also, not that I ever have to make this adjustment, but you could see that this mount further can lock on to this portion of the sight like this. So if you're shooting for really far distance and you find that you're having to adjust this all the way down, you know, it comes to a point where it becomes ridiculous. At that point, at those distances, you could then adjust the entire mechanism down one, and this would center this back to the middle. For the distances that I do, you know, up to about, you know, between 30-40 yards, this is absolutely fine. It has these numbers, which I generally store in a file in my phone, and it has a blank area on the back for if you want to put pencil marks. And the thing is that all things being relative, these numbers are also based on the limbs, right? So these limbs right here are, I believe they're like 35-pound limbs, but if I get my 50-pound limbs, obviously the amount of yards are going to change relative to these numbers. So they don't mean anything, they're just a reference point. I will say that with the hundreds and hundreds of arrows that have gone through this bow, as this sight sits right next to where it launches from, not a single screw has loosened, except for, and this is the only thing that I have found I have to watch out for, during assembly, as part of the breakdown of this unit, there's a screw right here when it's disassembled, and I put this away. This is how the mechanism locks in. It's this bolt right here, and here is the screw that it locks into, so that this sight can go into there, and basically representation looks like that, and that's how it sets up. Because that screw is always open and closed and open and closed, I have found that if I spend a lot of time shooting during the day, you always have to be cognizant that this screw doesn't loosen up by itself, because if it does, and this piece starts rattling, then you start losing accuracy, because it'll start to drop a bit. And I found that I use some of the bowstring wax and put it on the thread, and that'll hold it tight too. And I don't use anything else. I don't use Loctite, because I open and close that screw all of the time. This other screw right here I never mess with, so this one stays tight, right? And that's it. That's the only screw that I'm cognizant of, and in ensuring that it doesn't loosen up. So it's become a force of habit that I always check that screw is tight. So that is my honest review of all of my Samick Sage upgrades after 1 year. Thanks for watching.